Amazingly, sequencing is going on just about everywhere. On every continent except for Antarctica, there's now pretty significant capacity to sequence DNA and to sequence RNA. So there's this nice website that keeps track of where all the sequencing instruments are in the world, and this is kind of the up-to-date plot of where they are. Today there's about 1,800 of these instruments all throughout the world. You know, they're concentrated in kind of the northeast United States. There's another big institution in Shenzhen, China, called BGI that has a lot of instruments. There's many dozens of instruments across Europe and so forth. So if you take all of these instruments and then look up their specs for how much capacity they have, the worldwide sequencing capacity today is about 15 petabases per year. So if you remember, it's kilo, mega, giga, tera, peta. So this is a pretty substantial amount of data being accumulated for biology for all those different applications that I mentioned before. This is so much data that we really can't process it using we certainly can't process it using traditional servers. It becomes really difficult to process using just a cluster, and instead, myself and other researchers have been really looking towards some of these emerging parallel computing technologies to be able to analyze all these data. So in particular, I've been studying and have been developing applications using the Hadoop MapReduce framework for handling this large data computation. As you just heard, so MapReduce is Google's framework for large data computations. Really, the secret ingredient to it is that both data and computation are spread over these very large clusters with hundreds or thousands of different computers. It was developed at Google for tasks such as indexing the internet, computing PageRank, other machine learning applications over their very large data set. They usually keep the metrics of MapReduce, as their proprietary information, but in May of 2010, in a single month, they processed 946 petabytes of data. So in some sense, if you kind of do the math, Google every single day does the equivalent of a year's worth of sequence analysis just to keep up with their systems. So MapReduce is proprietary to Google. You can pretty much only get it if you're a Google employee. But based on the paper that they wrote in 2004 and other publications, there are now open source implementations of those same ideas. So in particular, there's the system Hadoop, the logo at the bottom there, is the leading open source implementation. It's being developed and actively used by Yahoo, Facebook, Twitter, Amazon. Even Google now is really been contributing in a substantial way to the development of Hadoop. So some of the benefits to both Hadoop and MapReduce: very, very scalable, very, very efficient, reliable, relatively easy to program, and then in particular runs on commodity computers such that you don't need, very, very expensive Blue Gene to be able to utilize thousands of cores. You can just get a regular cluster of computers and it'll run. Now the main challenge for MapReduce is that it does require some redesigning or retooling of your application such that they will work well inside of this MapReduce environment. So just to give you an idea about the system architecture, at a high level, it's very similar to a cluster that you may be used to working. So your desktop machine will talk to the Hadoop master node. That master node will then communicate with a set of slave nodes, and that's where the work is actually performed. What's interesting from them is actually what's missing. And what's missing is that there's no requirements for a shared file system that all the slave nodes can use. Instead, Hadoop is very tightly coupled with the system called the Hadoop Distributed File System, in which data are also spread across your cluster with many slave nodes. So rather than having all your petabytes of data on some big, like say, NFS server, your petabytes of data get split up across your cluster of many different nodes. And then instead of moving data to the code, we're going to move the code to the data. It's just a lot more efficient to do so.